By the way, how much do you make? And I know many of you have thinking in the back of your mind right now, Father Steve, it's none of your business. And you would be accurate and you would be right in thinking that statement to yourself. By the way, how much do you make? Why, that question is usually asked of me by the young people each year when I gather to visit with them and to answer questions that our children have about priesthood. And of course, we gather here in the church and they write down some questions, and usually it's either a question that's written down, or at the end when I invite them to ask other questions about me and the priesthood, usually one of the young people will always ask the question, by the way, Father Steve, how much do you make? You're wanting to know that too now, aren't you? My response to the children is always the same. Well, that's between me, the bookkeeper, my accountant, and the tax collector. But then I go on to say to them, what I make is enough. Well, that's always kind of a downer for them, but it's true. By the way, how much do you make? It's a question that, unfortunately, some employees around the water cooler will enter into conversation about, and, well, that's always a dangerous thing, because such conversations will usually lead to a conversation around unfairness, or perhaps being discriminated against, or certainly, as the gospel reminds to us, a good, healthy dose of grumbling. Anytime we start comparing what it is that we make, there's bound to be grumbling. Because there is no gospel, arguably, that you and I dislike the most than the one we just heard today. Oh, maybe second to this one would be, of course, the story of the prodigal son. We don't like that gospel reading either, although we can accept that a little bit better. It's a little more palatable because, of course, that's about forgiveness. But this is about money. And when it comes to money, it's about fairness. And today's gospel is anything but fair. Why? You and I automatically associate with those who put in the full day's burden of heat and labor. And why should they only get as much as those who had only put in an hour? We really dislike this gospel because, of course, it's about fairness, it's about money, it's about comparing, it's about all those things. It's about being just, isn't it? So why is it that Jesus gives us this parable? Well, because he wants the disciples, you and I, to change focus. Although it's hard to do because, of course, we think the parable is about money. But remember, it's a parable about the kingdom of heaven. It's a parable about the vineyard. It's not about necessarily us. But that's what's hard about this gospel, because this gospel always invites you and I to be attentive to ourselves and what's in it for me, that egocentric part of who we are. And so, of course, we're automatically inclined to go there. But Jesus wants us to realize that it's a parable about the vineyard. It's a parable about not worrying about how much you get paid, because everybody hopefully will get paid the same in the end. Because God will only give to you and I what God has. And what does God have? The usual daily wage. And you and I eventually need to discover and to realize that, well, that is simply enough. Enough to get us by for another day. The focus then is about the vineyard. The focus is about being invited to work in the vineyard. That's what the kingdom of heaven is about. It's about realizing that even those who come in at the last hour have an opportunity to work in the vineyard. And it's a beautiful thing because of who's in the vineyard. You see, that's where our focus needs to go. Who is in the vineyard? And the fact that you and I are given the opportunity, that we are invited, that we are called, that we are asked to join the workers and the worker in the vineyard. To have the privilege to work alongside Jesus Christ on a daily basis is, my friends, perhaps no greater privilege or blessing or gift that you and I could ever receive. To have the opportunity every day to go into the vineyard and to work alongside Jesus Christ, to build a kingdom of forgiveness, a kingdom of compassion, a kingdom of understanding, a kingdom of love. That's what you and I are invited to do. So the focus is not about how much, but it's about who. Who are we in the vineyard with? It's about Scott. Scott, who suffered most of his life with an horrible addiction. Alcohol consumed his entire being. And Scott was in and out of treatment more times than his family could even remember counting. Pretty much everybody had given up on Scott, including Scott himself. But all of a sudden, at the age of 68, near death because of the alcohol that he consumed on a daily basis, Scott finally realized, through the help of a counselor, that there was something inside of him that was worthy. There was something inside of him that could be loved. There was something inside of him that was a treasure, waiting to be discovered. And at that old age, although that's not so old, at that age, Scott was finally able to turn his life around. He's one of those people that eventually entered into the vineyard at 5 o'clock. Now, if that were your son or daughter, or your or my best friends, would we not rejoice in the fact that even though it took them 60 plus years or 70 plus years or 80 plus years or even on their deathbed, that if it took them that long to finally realize that they had been called and that they were being invited to work in the vineyard, wouldn't we as a family member, wouldn't we as a friend rejoice in the fact that they finally could join us side by side, digging in the dirt, working in the vineyard, gathering in the grapes, celebrating the joy that is the kingdom of heaven itself? Yes, it's true. It's not about money. It's not about how much. It's about who. Who do we want to join us in the vineyard? And then how? How will you and I be those ambassadors? How will we be Christ in today's world? How will you and I reach out and invite and go into the marketplace and tell those standing idly by, come, come, come work in the vineyard. You won't believe who's there. And they will come. And digging in the dirt and in gathering in the grapes, why, they will discover the beauty of the truth that God will give to us all that God has. And that is the usual daily wage.